Good morning and welcome to our webinar. This morning we have two presenters, Catherine Foote, Director of Evidence here at the Centre for Ageing Better, and Aideen Young, Evidence Manager. If you have sent your questions through to our inbox, I'm afraid we can't see them at the moment, so we invite you to resend your questions via your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I can see a couple of people have already sent their questions through. Thank you. So do just send them through and we will be able to see them and we can answer them throughout the webinar. Thank you. Now I shall hand over to Catherine and Aideen.
Hello everybody, good morning. It's still morning here in the UK, at least I think just about. My name is Catherine Foote, I'm Director of Evidence. As Ellie explained, here is me on the left of the screen, and I'm joined by my colleague Aideen. Aideen, do you want to say hello?
Hello.
And Aideen,
good morning.
Aideen is the lead author of our State of Ageing report. So thank you so much everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate your interest in our report. What we thought we would do is just run through, using some PowerPoint slides, just some highlights from it. We have a PDF of the report itself, which we can send round. Ellie, do you want to make that available by this system too? And of course, it's also downloadable from our website. That full report has a great deal more in it, at least, what would you say, Aideen, 50 or so indicators, I guess. It tries to cover, if not more, trying to present a picture of, as we've termed it, the state of ageing, later life now and in the future. The idea behind this report is essentially for us something of a kind of baseline assessment that we'll be using in future years to track our progress as a nation on responding to an ageing population. And this is, as I say, the first of what we expect to be a series of publications, probably over a number of years. So let me crack on and start to get into the content of the report. So I'll speak for probably just about 10 minutes or so. Please do send in your questions as I'm talking, and then once I've finished just rattling through some of the report's highlights, Aideen and I will start trying to field some of your questions. I think we're going to keep it all with questions in writing, is that right? Ellie, just simply because of the numbers of people involved in the webinar, that would make an actual oral conversation probably a little bit unmanageable. That's the plan. So this first slide here, the population change, just to really highlight the scale of the fundamental changing structure of our society that is upon us thanks to our ageing population. This is a change that is immense in its proportions and fast in its pace. So later life today, in our report, we go through a number of dimensions for thinking about how people are experiencing later life at the moment. Here, I've focused on a couple of our indicators around people's financial security and poverty. So there you have the almost 2 million people aged 65 and over living in poverty at the moment. And on the right-hand side there, this worrying potential beginning of a reversal of a recent historic trend of decline in pension poverty, which is, of course, very worrying indeed. Turning to health, of course, there's a huge story here about socioeconomic and other inequalities. So people living in more disadvantaged areas of the country live shorter, sicker, and more disabled lives. So the bulk of the report then goes on to look at people who are approaching later life. So a particular attempt, different data sets measure this differently and are different able to do this, but an attempt to look at people particularly in their 50s and 60s chronologically, or in that period approaching traditional definitions of later life. And at 4 areas that we feel at Ageing Better are central to whether or not this cohort will find themselves able to live wealthy, healthy, and happy later lives. And I'm going to just run through each of these 4 areas briefly in turn. Again, as I say, just to show a couple of highlights of what in the report gets into a certain amount more detail. So work and finances first. There are significantly more older people in work, and that does look like a somewhat stable upward trend that we hope will continue. But nevertheless, there are at least 1 million people aged 50 to state pension age in this country who are not in work and who would like to be. And of course, it's not just any work that matters, it's good quality work, fulfilling work and secure work. And that proportion, as you can see in those green bars there, of people in later life who are working in secure work is notable, isn't it? Health is, of course, a huge determinant of people's ability to be in fulfilling work. And here we see a socioeconomic gradient here too, just as we do really throughout this report. This report, I think, for me, at its heart, is a report about inequalities. But here you can see that stark difference between the proportion of people who report health problems as being an explanatory factor for something limiting the work that they can do between the poorest and the richest. So let's look at health specifically next. At Aideen Better, we like to think about health not just in terms of the absence of disease, but very much in terms of what health gives people in terms of their ability to live lives that they want to live day to day. And so one of the indicators that we pay close attention to is this one about activities of daily living. For those of you that aren't aware of that definition, ADLs, they are really fundamental day-to-day tasks, things like a person's ability to wash themselves, dress themselves, bathe, cook a hot meal at home, make a drink. And so you can see again that stark socioeconomic gradient here in people over 50 who are already experiencing problems performing some of these tasks day to day. But that absence of disease is important too. So again, a huge socioeconomic gradient here, of course, in the prevalence of things like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, stroke, and musculoskeletal conditions. Now, of course, part of the answer to improving the health of the population as we age is to improve the sorts of behaviours in young age, in midlife, in adulthood, that we know can prevent the onset of preventable mortality and other chronic and disabling conditions. And part of that, one of those health behaviours is physical activity, is remaining active. And here, so although the report goes into a few more areas, I picked out physical activity here, and you can see here that really significant proportion of people at all ages, but look at it increasing as we age, who are failing to meet government guidelines around activity. Here, looking at aerobic and muscle strengthening guidelines together. The next area I wanted to touch on before we get into a conversation is housing. And before I go on, just to stress, of course, that housing for later life, housing for an aging population is so much more than perhaps traditional conceptions of older people's housing. Extra care housing and sheltered housing, specialist housing as we age is and will continue to be important, but the vast majority of us live in ordinary houses, and that is still where most of us want to continue to live right up to the end of our lives. However, only 7% of our current houses meet accessibility standards, and if trends continue as predicted in terms of the prevalence of mobility difficulties, of disability as we age, this makes a housing stock that is not remotely fit for an ageing population and the needs that we will have to not only live in our own homes, but to visit each other, family and others, in other people's homes too. And it's not just in a matter of disability, of course, but and accessibility. But more than that, 1 in 5 homes are defined by the government as non-decent. So they are variously unsafe or cold, damp, non-decent homes to live. That's millions of people, disproportionately in fact, older people, living in homes that are directly unhealthy for you. Those homes that fail the decent home standard are disproportionately represented in the private rented sector. Why does that matter? Well, I guess it matters because the proportion of people in late midlife, approaching later life, who are in private rented accommodation is growing dramatically. And of course, here's a story not just of the health effects of disproportionately slum housing and poor quality housing in the private rented sector, but of course a story about people's financial security and the proportion of people's income that they're spending on their housing and will continue to need to spend on their housing if they're renting post-pension age, and what implications that has for their income in later life. And of course, as you may well be aware, within that private rented sector, you've got some inequalities too. So the proportion of people from minority ethnic backgrounds is much higher in the rented sector than people from white backgrounds. The fourth area I mentioned, we just wanted to have a look at, have an overview for you, is, well, how are people approaching later life, thinking about their communities, the places where they live, their social relationships, their ability to connect with others, not least their family members. Well, a lot of us do feel that we belong to our neighbourhood, and that is a figure that increases as we age. But the fabric of our social relationships, the structure of our social relationships is changing in all sorts of complex ways. So I've just picked out a couple of things here. One, you'll see that over a quarter of people who live alone, women who live alone, are in that 45 to 54 age bracket now. And divorce is growing at a faster rate among over 50s compared to any other age group. So that's a quick rattle through of our State of Ageing report. As I say, there's a great deal more in there. It's not a single story. Some indicators are on a, if you like, positive trend, numbers of older workers being one. For some, there are some worrying reversals of recent improvements, like pension of poverty. For others, it's a story of deep, continued structural inequalities, and inequalities, for instance, in healthy life expectancy that appear to be widening and that are vastly different in different parts of the country. But behind the numbers, of course, are real people. So we also wanted to just bring their voices into the webinar this morning. So we asked some people, what are their hopes and fears for their own later life? So that's our summary. Thank you very much for your attention for this first 10 minutes. As I said, there's a great deal more in the report for you to have a read of the PDF if you haven't had a chance to already. But we'd like now to move on to some of your questions. And please do, as we begin to respond to them, respond yourself, and indeed offer other questions to us too. So, Aideen, can I turn to you then? Any questions in particular that you wanted to address?
Yeah. Well, hello, Guy. There's 3 questions from Guy here, which are all very interrelated, I think. And the first, you ask whether we have any data on older people's life satisfaction by socioeconomic status, which we do not actually. There's not a lot of data on that. And related to that, you've asked quite this interesting question about how the report quite rightly highlights I'm sorry, I think I need to repeat the question because not everyone can see them. You say the report quite rightly highlights many inequalities and issues around access to work, housing and good health. However, at the same time, older people report huge levels of life satisfaction and well-being and engagement in their communities. How are we to put these two stories of ageing together? And Guy, I think probably what you're getting at here are ideas around resilience and positivity. And indeed, I think if we go right back to our Later Life in 2015 report, where we did a cluster analysis of people in the English longitudinal study of ageing, we ended up with these 6 clusters of people who were called, given the monikers, thriving boomers, downbeat boomers, can-do and connected, worried and disconnected, squeezed middle-age and struggling and alone. And the point about these was that we found that it was quite possible that there were people, like for example, the downbeat boomers were doing perfectly well financially and economically, but they weren't very positive. So they might be people who would report low life satisfaction, but there were also people whom you might expect to have, facing struggles in their lives, but in fact they were showing high levels of positivity. So that's sort of, some qualitative, well, it's not qualitative, it was quantitative cluster analysis, but the evidence from that is that you can see positivity, across the board. But we don't, but we don't have any data at this time showing the ONS doesn't break down life satisfaction by LCS at this time. And the next thing that, Guy, you said, is there a glass half empty, glass half full issue to be addressed in the presentation of the report's findings?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think when you try to present what is essentially, kind of state of the nation, we're covering an awful lot of ground when we collectively talk, aren't we, about how must society respond to an ageing population. It's every area of our economy, of our society, of civil society. So there isn't a single story of good and bad. I think things can be simultaneously bad and getting better, but not getting better fast enough. And I think some things can be good, but can be good by virtue of perhaps the limited ways in which we're currently measuring or conceptualizing them, and I'd probably put into that bucket some of what we think we know, or how little we know at the moment about the role that the social social infrastructure and built environment of our communities can help or hinder us to feel good as we age. So it's certainly, I think, a subtle message and not a single message where we certainly take the view that there are deep structural inequalities and a story of social injustice here that we need to be, angry about and seek to solve, at the same time as tremendous opportunities to take. So I'm afraid I think it is indeed both a story of being half full and half empty at the same time. Aideen, do you want to pick up another question?
I see a question here from Howard saying, I find employers' agencies seem to be ageist behind the scenes. Is that common across the country? I think we would definitely say that there is still a great deal of ageism in the workplace and being demonstrated by employers, and it's something that we're working very hard on at the moment. There's still a very pervasive view that older workers are stuck in their ways, unable to adapt to change, unable to learn. And there are about 1 million, we estimate about 1 million older people who are involuntarily out of work and would like to get back into the workplace. We are working very hard on trying to promote age-friendly working practices, and you could find reports about that on our website. We find from the research that we've done that older workers want exactly the same thing in the workplace as everybody else. Unsurprisingly, they want to be challenged, they want to be fulfilled, they want opportunities for career development and mentoring. But often are not being given those opportunities in favour of their younger colleagues. At the same time, of course, although it's not confined to younger people, older workers are more likely to suffer from chronic health conditions, and they are also more likely to have caring responsibilities. The ONS have a report this morning, actually, that 1 in 4 working women and 1 in 8 older working women and 1 in 8 older working men are carers. So, that makes it very, very difficult for them to do their jobs. And research that we've done has shown that a great many people who have caring responsibilities and health conditions are thinking of leaving work because of that. So we would like to see age-friendly working practices in which older people are given the same career opportunities at work as everyone else, but are also the workplaces make small adjustments for health conditions and enable flexible working to enable these people to stay in their jobs. And another part of the age-friendly working scenario is the idea of a midlife review, which we really think can help people, in this stage of life, prepare for their later lives.
Great, thank you. Yes, I just add, of course, that I think Aideen's right that there's strong evidence of ageism and age discrimination in the workplace, but at least to some extent that's a symptom, I think, of a broader societal problem that we have, wherein ageism is still fundamentally, deeply ingrained probably within all of us, and is arguably one of the kind of last entirely socially acceptable forms of discrimination, isn't it? So at Aging Better, we are interested in shifting attitudes to age and combating both the prejudices, the discrimination and the stereotypes that exist around ageing to play our part in what would be an immense structural shift to begin to move us away from our deeply ingrained ageism. It's just everywhere in society, isn't it? Just imagine, even though age sits alongside sexual orientation and other things in the Equality Act in law as something one is not allowed to discriminate against. Every day we hear people saying to each other, "Wow, you don't look your age." Imagine saying that to a gay person. "Wow, you look really straight today. What's your secret?" It's so socially acceptable, ageism at every level, and is I think for me, alongside socioeconomic inequality and poverty, one of the kind of underlying explanatory themes of some of this data that we've put in this report today. Anyway, hopefully that's given a bit of time for Aideen to look at some more questions. Aideen, what would you like to tackle next?
There's a lot of questions here. Here's just one. Is there a need for society to look at old age differently and not as a burden? That's just a really nice one. Yes, absolutely. Of course, that's the case. How can old age possibly be a burden? I mean, it's a gift. It's a great success. People, you may be aware, of course, at the moment that there's a lot in the news about the fact that our life expectancy increases or stalling, so that the year on year increases in life expectancy that we've been seeing have actually sort of ground to a halt and may even be going into reverse in some parts of the country. And I mean, we all recognise that to be really a step backwards. It's a really terrible thing. And so, given that that's a step backwards, how can old age be a burden? It's a great thing to live a long life. People have so much to give. They're so, just like everybody else. So of course we can't look at it as a burden. It's a gift.
Let me have a look at one. Caroline, you've asked, I'm really interested to understand the impact of earlier life choices and circumstances with later life. Inequalities for women are around the gender pay gap, but also if they've been a single parent. Could we be seeing social trends playing out over the next 20 years as people move into later life in terms of their choice of housing and financial security? Yes, absolutely. So my only response to that right now, Caroline, is to please watch this space for some work that we will be commissioning very shortly to try and understand more deeply some of the social and structural trends in society that are being experienced by people in their 40s and 50s at the moment. As you say, the different choices that they're making, the different economies, labour markets and housing markets that they are aging in, and what the implications of those things might be for us to do some modelling for how we think the future of ageing might be playing out. So it's a complex issue to get into, and there are all sorts of single studies that exist already looking at some of it, but we're going to try and bring that all together with some modelling over the next year or so.
And if I could add to that, thinking about kind of a life course thing, as we look towards the older population going forward, there's many things happening now that will impact on our future cohorts of older people. Family structures are really changing. 1 in 5 women born in the 1960s is childless, single, childless and living alone. That will have an enormous impact on our has implications for care, for housing, and all sorts of things when those people are in their later years. And a question here from Jason: is the golden age of retirement now over? I would think that it probably is. People are living much longer. The retirement age is going up. We know that many people do not have nearly enough saved for the retirement. Auto-enrollment has been a fantastic step forward in that regard. But, people are, the age of the cliff edge retirement is almost certainly a thing of the past. People are, working flexibly, then they're working part-time, they have portfolio careers, and they're going to have to work much longer than they ever did in the past.
And of course, some of you may have noticed the Office of National Statistics published some data this morning around the relationship between caring responsibilities and working as people age. And perhaps arguably, in the golden age of retirement, there weren't a great deal of women in the workplace. That's changed now, and so we're seeing in the figures for people in their 50s and 60s, people needing to combine increasingly caring responsibilities with part-time work as they're caring for their older parents, an activity that's disproportionately carried out by women. That means that, just as Aideen said, the structure of people's employment and activity is undergoing some quite fundamental shifts, and yet we're still, in general, living in labour markets and with employers that don't have yet to fully, I think, capitalise on the opportunities that flexible working opportunities and support for carers could give them to retain their workforce. Many other questions. Aideen, do you want to?
A question here about, did we find any significant lived experiences, differences pertaining to people from BAME communities versus non-BAME? This report is not reporting on lived experience. It's all based on data from publicly available data sources. It's very unfortunate that in our large data sets in this country, there was really very little data on ethnic minorities. There simply aren't enough participating in those big surveys. Understanding Society is one data set that it has more ethnic minority participants than others. So we can say, for example, we've got some data around communities, that most people feel they belong to their communities, they feel they live in a close-knit neighbourhood. But that people from BAME backgrounds are less likely than white people of the same age to be able to say that. That's unfortunately one of the very few pieces of data that we have that pertains to BAME communities.
Although perhaps one would hope that over the long term,
definitely,
as an increasingly diverse population in this country ages, that structure will change and we'll have more data. And certainly at city level, and at smaller geography level in parts of the country that are more ethnically diverse, there's more data. But we're looking, of course, here at some of the big national data sets. Ben Cook asks, will you be looking at the importance of place and the role of the arts and the role arts and culture can play here, following on from this report? Ben, yes, we have as part of our 4 priority areas, one of them is this one around connected communities, and we're scoping at the moment, exactly specifically for us at Aging Better, what work that will that will lead us to in future years, but at the moment it's entirely focused on both the social infrastructure of places, so the opportunities there are for people to interact, for people to get engaged in activities that give their lives meaning and that are enjoyable and worthwhile to them. So arts and culture, I think, alongside other sport and leisure and other sorts of activities, absolutely central. And the other half of our interest in connected communities is around the built environment. So are there physical places, transport facilities, libraries, that bring communities together?
There's a question here about the life-enhancing activities of travel. How do the life-enhancing activities of travel decline in later life? NB, ageism and travel insurance. I have to say, I don't think we do know anything about travel insurance. I can say that there are certainly in rural areas big problems for older people with travel. It is something we've talked about. It's mentioned in the report that among a significant proportion of people aged 80 and over, the greatest barriers to using public transport is their health. But a lot of even younger people, a quarter of 50 to 59-year-olds don't use public transport because it's not convenient, 20% because it doesn't go where they want to go. So it is a big issue, particularly in rural areas. We think there's a big role for the voluntary sector there because it's a huge contributor to social isolation in those communities.
Thank you. We had a couple of questions on the data. One from Jackie Richards. Later life is such an ageist concept but used extensively in research. For those of us over 50, it is our life and we are not one cohort, as your research is showing. What can be done to get more positive, relevant terminology that accurately reflects how people live their lives? And that relates a little bit to a question from Catherine Bramwell. Are there any of the data sets beginning to disaggregate age groups from 65 plus? There's big differences between the 10-year grouping in older age groups. Well, we couldn't agree more, could we, Aideen, about the need for that kind of disaggregated data. Some data sets are better than others, and we actually, when we launched the report, we were able to open some positive conversations with the Office of National Statistics, some of the owners of some of this data sets around our mutual interest in getting much better, more granular, more disaggregated data available, because exactly as you say, there's no planet on which the age group 50 plus gives you any tremendous insight, is there, given that essentially half of a person's lifespan nowadays.
It would be a bit like putting everybody aged 35 to 65 in one group and then 65 to 95 in another. So it's very difficult to know what terminology to use. Later life, I mean, we really don't know what we should say. I've been in a group of people who said they prefer the term senior, but then
that's very popular in the States, isn't it? Yeah.
Senior, but I'm not sure about that either. Yes, suggestions welcome as to what terminology we might use. We are actually commissioning a bit of research around language. Yep.
Over the next year, we're going to be doing quite a bit of work to try and understand. Hopefully, doing it with some of the other organisations interested in ageing in this country. Some of the other voluntary organisations still to be agreed, but to try and understand a little bit more how we can share in a positive, accurate, and modern terminology around ageing in the future.
There's a question on digital. Would you like to try that? The impact of digital. Do we know if this will encourage a change in mindset in how we view older people in our society? The impact of digital.
Where's that?
At the very bottom there, Jason.
Oh, yes.
A couple of questions on digital.
We hear lots of information about the impact of digital.
Yeah.
Do we know if this will encourage a change in mindset in how we view older people in our society? Well, indeed, we certainly do hear lots of information about the impact of digital as a source of solution to all sorts of the issues that we're talking about, whether it's improving people's connections, access to information and advice, support. There are all sorts of ways in which it's a huge agenda, isn't it? I think that could be true. But the short answer to your question, Jason, I think is no, we don't know. I don't think whether this would encourage a change in mindset exactly, although one would hope that indeed any initiatives or technology that enable us to become a less age-segregated society can only help.
Yeah, I mean, we have quite a lot of data on that. I mean, we know, for example, that, a quarter of people aged 55 and over, incredibly, have never used the internet. A third of people aged 65 and over, and 80% of non-users over the age of 65 have no intention of getting online. They're quite stark statistics. Obviously, as the baby boomers grow into later life, grow into older ages, that will change, but presumably there will be other technologies that will still be challenging. I don't know how it's going to affect how we view older people in our society. What else have we got? How much of an impact will the rise of mental health impact older people? Yeah, there certainly is an increase. Mental health issues are an issue for older people even now, and presumably that is going to increase into the future. It's becoming, whether it's a question of recognition, diagnosis, I'm not sure. We know that even right now, a quarter of women in the 45 to 54-year-old age group have experienced a common mental health disorder. So it's
and still, I think in those statistics, there's a certain amount of underdiagnosis.
Yes, I'm quite sure. So even though we associate it with young people, it's clearly very prevalent among people in midlife also. When asked to rate their level of anxiety on the previous day, only 40% of 50-year-olds could rate it as low. So it is an issue. The trend, the pattern is that it seems that anxiety seems to, at this particular moment in time, it peaks. We have a peak in around the 20s, and then peaks again in midlife and goes back down again. But whether that pattern will persist as this cohort ages, I think is impossible to say at this time. I don't think we don't know anything really about what the patterns of mental health look like longitudinally at this time.
Yeah, I think that's true. We've had a question here. Let me have a look. About disparity between rural areas and metropolitan areas in ageing. Yes, absolutely. So in this short report, highlighting some key variations in national statistics, we didn't get into it in great detail, but in all sorts of different domains in terms of access to services, access to transport and opportunities to connect, as well as, of course, different economic circumstances in terms of labour market for those still wanting to be in the workforce. There are absolutely disparities between cities and rural areas, and of course, at the moment, our older population, as will probably continue to be the case, is concentrated in certain areas. So there are big differences in if you take any city or rural area in the proportions of older people living in those cities, and therefore the kind of service response that exists.
What else have we got? Just looking to see what we haven't answered. Actually, we've what percentage? Well, this is a stats one. What percentage of over 65 in the UK are from BME backgrounds? It's very small.
It is at the moment, isn't it? I don't have
it's a small
I'm afraid.
Percentage overall, which I can't put my hand on right this very minute, but in the country as a whole, it's not very large. Let's see, what else have we got over here? Impact of digital, we've talked about.
5% non-white.
Yeah, okay.
Aideen and I are just looking through your questions. If anybody has another one
we've answered a lot
that they'd be very keen to ask, please do. We really, as I say, appreciate your taking part in this webinar today, and discussing some of these issues for us. Age Better is we've been around for 3 years now, but we're still at the start of a quite an ambitious programme of work, and really keen to bring as many perspectives as we can into what we do. Here are some other questions now just coming through. Yeah. Thank you very much. Let's just read them for a second, Aideen. Okay, so Alfonso asks how many working people do so because of economic need versus fulfilling their intellectual or social need. Absolutely. The questions in the labour force survey get at this to some extent, particularly when they're asking people when they retired, why did they retire. But I guess the issue, I suppose, with a report like this, of course, is that by presenting national statistics, you don't get into that subtlety of individual distinction. So we're very clear in the work that we do that we don't stop at just saying we want more people aged 50 to state pension age to be in work, to be in any work. Work has to be good for you. It has to be giving you a living wage, a wage that will help support you to live well in later life, and also has to be work that you find fulfilling.
Question from Camilla: what are your thoughts on how the state pension age interacts with some of the inequalities you have discussed, for example, in healthy life expectancy, employment rates, caring responsibilities, and income, etc.? Well, yes, I think, there really are some important considerations there. The report does highlight significant inequalities in health, in the age at which you have an onset of disease, the likelihood of having to fall out of work because of health conditions, and so forth. And so, yes, increases in state pension age would and could disproportionately adversely impact those people who are most disadvantaged and who are suffering most with health conditions, with caring responsibilities, and so forth. And it's why it's all the more important for the recommendations in this report to be implemented. We have recommendations in here, but really, and I think it is stated explicitly, one of the main things is to reduce the gap between rich and poor, so that with the result that the intersection between state pension age and the things that you point out here would become less critical. It would be less of an issue that as we increase state pension age, it would affect everyone equally. So yes, at the moment, I think it could be a very important point, and one that hopefully we could remedy by addressing inequality.
Just noticed just at the top there, Ellie, if you could just go up one. Chris Hill, a bit further up. There we go. I was asked a question about digital inclusion, saying, given current stats on digital exclusion in older people, do we just wait until generations catch up? And just a brief response to that, in that to say that evidence, I think, is quite clear that digital inclusion, as I've read it, is not a one-off. It's not a matter of becoming digitally savvy and then remaining so, given the pace and change of digital technology. So I think we don't know, we can't be sure that that younger cohorts of people who use digital technology at the moment will continue to in the future as they and technology both change. Chris then also asked a question a little bit lower down about self-employment. Yes, absolutely. I believe the proportion, even in this country, the statistics are that the age group who are most likely to set up their own businesses are the older age group at the moment. But yes, of course, encouraging opportunities for people to find any ways they can to get engaged in employment that gives them income and that is fulfilling to them is really important. And as we look at work, as we look in our work at how to support more people into work, we're looking not just at traditional employment support services, but looking more broadly at the whole work labour market sector. Should we go back down and see if we've got any questions most recently?
Have you looked at how, something from Caroline, have you looked at how prepared people are around their pensions and their financial capability for the future? There is data, we haven't looked at it ourselves, but there's plenty of data to say that people are not terribly prepared, which is why we are very interested in the whole concept of the midlife review. We know that there are a significant proportion of people who really do not have remotely enough savings for their later lives. Auto-enrollment has been a big step forward in improving that situation, but we are interested in a sort of a broader thing, which has been gaining some traction, called the midlife review or the midlife MOT, which would help people from midlife and onwards think about lots of aspects that they'll need to think about in their later lives, including their pensions and their financial capabilities, but other things like their homes and downsizing and health and relationships and connections and so forth. So that's something we're very interested in as part of our whole age-friendly employer concept.
Got a housing question from Jill. Do you think planning should help provide more specialist housing, such as retirement properties and homes with on-site care, or should the focus be on setting a requirement for all new builds to meet access standards suitable for all ages? I suppose I would respond, Jill, that I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we probably need both, and it'll be different. What we do need, what we definitely know we need, is more support for planning departments to really understand and delve into their population, its needs, and likely future needs, to be on much firmer ground when they're setting out their perspectives for what needs to be built locally, and then going through planning processes with developers, to be on much firmer ground about why they're setting any particular requirements for types of housing that they are, so that they're not then subject to challenge from developers on the grounds of viability and other things. I think different geographical areas will vary a great deal, but certainly as Ageing Better, we do believe fundamentally that this country at the moment is missing an enormous trick in the way the government at the moment is giving essentially free hand to developers to put up small, tall, out-of-town homes, housing developments at increasing pace, meeting its goal around vastly increasing the number of houses that are built in this country, and not important that is, but completely doing that, flying in the face of what the trends are around our needs as an ageing society. So we feel very strongly that there should be much greater proportion of housing, new builds that are built to accessible standards. And that anything else is woefully short-sighted, thinking perhaps about the first immediate owners of some of those properties and not about their broader families and not about future owners, even though these houses are intended to be built for decades or a century, one would hope. So I think it's both and, in short, Jill. We've got 5 minutes to go, I think. Is that right? 10 minutes to go. Sorry, I thought my colleague Ellie was holding up one hand, but she was holding up two hands. 10 minutes to go.
Okay.
Aideen, have you got another question?
Well, I was just going to acknowledge this comment from Catherine, who's doing a Masters of Ageing in Melbourne, and says we're using the 3 lenses for ageing: biological, chronological, and biographical. I feel this approach gives opportunities to change narratives associated with ageism rather than just using chronology. And I would just say, yes, that sounds great. And, I would wholeheartedly agree with that sort of approach. It means you're taking a whole person approach to someone, their story, and who they are, as well as all their other aspects. So I think we would agree with that as an approach. It may be difficult for us to do it in practice as we go about our research, but I really do like the sound of that.
Jan asks, older people often need closer parking spaces, larger print, easier access to GPs, dentists, opticians, not just concessions at the cinema. Are there any other accessibility projects, like Take a Seat in Nottingham, that aim to address the difficulties older people have simply in their daily lives? So there are other initiatives, for instance, around access to toilets when you're out and about, as well as access to seating. One, I think, interesting initiative that an awful lot of the UK network of age-friendly cities and communities, which is a WHO-affiliated network of organisations that we support. We've got 31 of those around the country at the moment, places that are committed to becoming age-friendly. One of the things that many of those are doing are conducting local place audits. And there are some great tools, some apps and other things that can be used for this, where you can go as a group of individuals in your community out around the streets, assessing with some evidence-based advice from some really good academic work, assessing your local community for all sorts of different dimensions about the physical space and the services that are provided, to get a sense of the degree to which it's age-friendly or not, data and evidence. That's then very useful when talking to local authority planning departments and others around what changes you would want to see them make locally. Rob's asked another housing question. Rather than building new retirement communities, might energy and resources be better put into initiatives that help to better use existing stock, like home share or support to move services? I think there's a lot of truth to that. Well, I've also a lot of sympathy with that view. I think, I suppose for me, as Ageing Better, we have a priority on, first and foremost, to those who are most at risk of missing out on later life. And so our priority as an organisation in terms of existing stock is looking at people who are living in seriously poor quality accommodation, and what can be done to maintain and improve those homes. So, for instance, most older people at the moment own their own properties, but older people, particularly on low incomes, state pension, and so on, are finding themselves unable to meet, for instance, catastrophic costs. You know, if they need to replace a boiler, repair a roof, that means that their houses are becoming unhealthy and unsafe to live in, and yet there's no route, is there? No state aid, no route to address that for them, although there used to be in days gone by. But certainly, more generally, I think use of existing stock clearly is fundamental, even if the government meets its incredibly ambitious house building targets, and even if those houses were built to be more age-friendly, to be more accessible. Still, 80% of people will be living in 2050 in houses that already exist right now. So what we can do to make best use of existing stock is really crucial.
Something just here from Yolanda. I feel current government and bodies like BITC, that's Business in the Community, are paying lip service to discrimination in work by age. What is Centre for Ageing Better doing to lobby them? Well, we have a partnership with Business in the Community, so we are working actively with them. I don't know if it's true to say they're paying lip service. I mean, they are involved with us on our age-friendly initiatives. So we have an active program of work to try and implement and embed age-friendly practices out there in the world. So that is what we're doing.
It's true, and we're very conscious, I think, as we're trying to expand our work across all sorts of different areas. Now we're more established as an organisation, and I think we're very conscious that in our initial phase of work, we've focused on through the BITC network, big employers who've they've already got it, you know, they're already engaged, they're part of the network because they are trying to do something, whether or not that's effective is something that we're looking at with them with some evaluations. But there's a bigger issue, I think, isn't there, around how you begin to get employers that haven't even got ageism, age discrimination, and older workers on the beginnings of their agenda, and what you do for employees in those industries. Again, something that we're looking at, how you begin to make that case, and make that case more forcefully, for instance, through legal challenge. So do watch the space for more activity from us on that score. So we've got a couple of minutes left. So there's one question here from Jackie. How can resources be made available for small grassroots organisations that can reach more people, especially the less advantaged? So often grants are given to large organisations which often don't filter down. Yes, so absolutely agree with you. There are a whole range of issues here around how we can improve access to funding for grassroots, voluntary and community sector organisations. I'll mention two things that strike me, for instance. One, something that we talk to big funders and government about an awful lot is the extraordinarily unrealistic expectations there are so often from funders on the ability for some of these organisations to, for instance, prove that they can, the classic, directly save the NHS money, next year, immediately, by dint of what they're doing, even if what they're doing has inherent social value and improves people's quality of lives, and that much is immediately apparent from what they're able to evidence. So there's something, I think, about unfair standards of evidence applied across the sector. And I think there's also something about people, these organisations' capacity to convince funders and others of the impact of what they're doing. So we're looking at the moment as an organisation ourselves at Aging Better, but what role might we be able to play to support and build organisations' capacity in thinking about how they demonstrate their impact and evaluate the effectiveness of what they do in a way that would be really convincing and powerful for funders. Do you think we can squeeze in one more answer?
Well, I'm just going to maybe, she's gone offline. I started to talk about it. So whether someone, Maggie was talking about a third ager being a good description of an older person. So I'm just going to remark on that. She seems to think that works well. And I was simply going to say that, in fact, it possibly runs counter to our kind of thinking about the 100-year life and trying to kind of dispense with that three-stage life thing, where the first stage is childhood and education, and then your middle working years, and then your later life. So I'm not sure whether everyone would agree with that third age thing. There's been a lot of conversation about the fact that we're trying to move away from the three ages and have a multi-stage life in our 100+ years.
Where people's chronological age is not an inherent indicator of the
what they're doing
of their life.
So,
indeed.
So, but Maggie has gone.
All right, well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found some of that useful. It's a slightly surreal experience just responding to these written questions in the silence of nothing but our own voices. But I hope you got something out of it. And we certainly were interested to see your questions. Please do read the report and continue to engage with us. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your Friday and weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.